千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now. To be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process of the Tao. From our previous discussion, you'll recall that chapter 61, the Chinese title for the chapter is Dwell Below, 居下章. And as I mentioned previously, the first character means to reside, occupy, or dwell. The second character, the one in the middle, means lower or below. And taking the lower position, to reside in the lower position, means to remain with a humble disposition. It's like water flowing automatically to the lowest point. And to be at the lowest point is actually a position of power, as we have seen in this chapter. To continue with our recap, we previously looked at the sectional analysis of 61. So what we were able to do was to divide it up into 3 sections. And this is based on looking at the repeating characters in the original text. You can see the highlighted characters from line to line are the exact same characters. And this is oftentimes found in a poetic construction in the ancient Chinese poems. And by recognizing where the similarities are, you can then visually discern the sectional breaks. And that helps you understand that one particular chapter or verse of the Tao Te Ching is broken up into multiple sections. Each one is expressing a related thought to the overall meaning, but it's a unit by itself. So here, just by glancing at this, you can see that there are quite a few repetitions. And what we got to last time was line 13. So as I mentioned, only a couple more lines to go. And notice that with the last 2 lines, one thing that I want to point out is that if you inspect the last 2 lines, you won't see common characters between them. And this is okay. Not all the lines in the Tao Te Ching have common characters from one to the next. Sometimes when you don't find the common characters in the same position from one line to the next, you have to go back to the meaning. You have to figure out the meaning of what it's trying to express and then use the meaning to determine where the sections are. So we're going to be doing that in the next chapter, but let's focus on this one. For our discussion today, what I want to do is to do a recap of the first 2 sections, and that's only a handful of slides that'll go by very quickly, and that'll just bring everybody up to date on the same page. And then we can go to the last section. And what I want to do there too is that I want to take a small step back, go back to 12, so we can discuss 12 and 13 together, and then finally the last two lines. So that's the plan. Now, as I mentioned, this chapter talks a lot about the large country, the small country. These are all metaphoric. So this is not, strictly speaking, meant for kings and rulers and emperors of ancient China. This is meant to address the needs of everyone, all cultivators of the Tao, when they go through their days. But starting with the interaction between kingdoms, large and small. Last time I showed you guys this graph. So you can see that I have the large country at the bottom and then small countries above. That arrangement is intentional because in this chapter, Lao Tzu specifically uses the metaphor of the low-lying larger river to represent the large country. So above the level of the large country or the lowest river are the creeks, streams, smaller rivers, rivulets that empty into it from a higher position. And that's why the slide is arranged in this way. The important thing to note is the characteristics describing the large country that Lao Tzu used. There are two. To the left, you see that the large country is described as a point of convergence, a converging point. Looking at this graph, it's easy to see why. It's like the saying goes, all roads lead to Rome. In ancient times, the Roman Empire was large and powerful, and all the outlying, bordering regions and countries and much smaller states would pay tribute, would make pilgrimage to Rome. So they all went there as their converging point. Ancient China had a similar role when it was powerful. It too had the smaller countries along its borders, visiting, converging, paying tributes, and so on. So then the other characteristic that was pointed out by Lao Tzu was that all this influx of external cultural exchange, trade, offers of alliance, requests for protection, and so on, the large country is in a position to be receptive. And this was utilized with this was described with the yin principle in this chapter of the Tao Te Ching. Then, as you know, in our talks, we always have to map everything back to real life. Like, this is all very well for ancient Rome and the ancient Chinese Empire. That's great. Historically, they're fascinating, but what about us? How does this apply to us? Well, the metaphor of large country, small country, large kingdoms, small kingdoms applies to us in various ways. So using the exact same graph, I apply the idea to the modern world, to you and me. So we play the role of the large country sometimes, and then we play the role of the small country other times. So at the bottom here, as you can see, I've got you as the customer. So every day, as we live our lives, we all have ample opportunities to be receiving services. And the different services that we receive converge upon us as the customer or the client. So the example that I used previously, there's transportation services, maybe a taxi driver or someone playing a similar role. Even the train conductor plays a role in that, depending on the mode of transportation. The reception, that would be the doorman, the receptionist, the person responsible for granting access, for providing greeting. And then services provided, it can be consultation. This could be your accountant. This could be your attorney. This could be hairdresser. This could be anything, perhaps manicure, pedicure, etc. All the different services that we can possibly receive in the world, we have this connection or this relationship. And then, of course, there's food and drinks, there's restaurants and waiters. So the idea is that all the principles that Lao Tzu talks about apply because you're the point of convergence for all these services. You're the one who's on the receiving end. And just like Lao Tzu advising the large country, the powerful empire, it is actually in your best interest to be gracious, courteous, polite, and humble. The lowest river in the lowest position denotes the practice of the natural humility in the Tao. And from that, we can actually extract quite a few Tao principles to apply to life. So still on our recap, when we applied what we talked about to everyday living, we see that number one, relationship dynamics constantly change. Sometimes you are above, sometimes you are below, and sometimes you are both in the same setting. You can, for instance, be both parent and child in a multi-generational home. Just as an example, at the workplace, you can be a direct report, but also a supervisor for the people who are under you in the org chart. And then there's, of course, customers, clients, as we talked about in the previous slide. You'll be receiving services, but also you will find yourself in the role of providing services to others. And what Lao Tzu says is that you want to be open and receptive. This attitude applies to every aspect of the interactions. So if you were a manager or supervisor, as an example, you always want to be open and receptive to different opinions. It's not that your way is the only possible way. There are many other possible solutions. And with an open mind, you may be able to find a better one. So you are the lowest river. And when you are in that position to receive services from others, you always want to be courteous. And this can cover a lot of ground. This can cover people that we see every day. So think of their service as the tribute or the water flowing from a small river to a large river. And there's more. There are endless applications of the Tao to life. So when we talk about leadership, one example of leadership or an example of the large country metaphor is the boss, the manager, the supervisor, the business leader. So the wise person in that leadership role understands this principle of the Tao, to be humble, treating everyone as an equal, regardless of their place in the organizational hierarchy, and being receptive, being willing to listen, open door policy. The thing to point out is that just as in ancient times, being gracious and receptive did not diminish the status of a powerful empire in any way. When you apply that to life, it does not diminish the status of leadership in any way. It's quite the contrary. It actually enhances your status. It actually inspires loyalty from those who interact with you. So there's every reason to follow this principle of the Tao. So what about on the other end? What about when you are the person providing the service to someone else? So we covered this as well. The recap to that is basically service mentality, service orientation. When you are a service professional and you are wise in the ways of the Tao, you would also have the humility of the Tao to be humble, to provide great service, to be receptive, to listen to customer or client feedback. And just like it was for the business leader, this would not diminish your status in any way. Quite the contrary. It would enhance your status. You would bring more business. It would actually be very good it will cause the Tao to be present in your life, which brings about prosperity and harmony. So this is especially important because we have transitioned into a service economy, no longer a manufacturing economy. So more relevant than ever. So with that as our recap, we're ready to talk about the last two lines of Tao Te Ching chapter 61 to finish off our discussion. So taking a small step back, I want to revisit line 12. The large country only wishes to gather and protect people. So let's talk about that for just a moment. When you are receptive and you are the converging point as the large country, you become ever more powerful by taking more small countries under your wings. So this is true in ancient times. It is how an empire would grow even more powerful, even more prestigious by taking on more smaller countries as client states. So then when the large country is gracious in the process of doing this, it is demonstrating generosity. It is demonstrating that it's a welcoming big tent that can accommodate more. So then the small countries do their share to contribute to the greatness of the large country or a powerful empire. Let's apply that to life. When you have someone in a leadership position who is gracious, generous, he or she demonstrates class. And thinking back in the professional world, the workplace situation, you have probably seen or maybe even experienced wise leaders in the business world who are gracious, who have class. They have much more likelihood, much more of a tendency to have people with them, workers under them who are productive and happy. They are likely to have a team that is very high performing and that contributes to their greatness. So now let's go back to where we were at last time, to line 13. Look at it from the perspective of the small country. Small country protects itself by being accepted into the trusted circle of the large country. So the translation says, the small country only wishes to join and serve people. And realistically, this can be a survival issue for the smaller country. It is not as strong, not as powerful as the large, great kingdom, and therefore it needs friends, it needs allies. And when you are able to win acceptance into the trusted circle, that is the starting point of beneficial diplomacy. Friendship, trade, mutually beneficial relationships. Let's map that to real life. So we're talking about service provider demonstrating appreciation to customers or clients. Now, the customer or client will reciprocate with repeat business. Hence, this is the reason why I say the Tao is present, peace and prosperity prevail. So what have we extracted out of this slide and the previous slide? It is all about the humble approach. The humble approach from the smaller country or the large country. Both sides may seem similar superficially, but they are distinct in essence. In real life, when the more powerful person in an exchange is kind, gracious, that is definitely something that will cause you to be welcome. When you are providing service and you are expressing appreciation of the customers, it is the starting point of beneficial repeat business, and that is eventually going to work out to your benefit. So you may start out as, for instance, a client service representative, but then greater results, beneficial results, productivity and profits will elevate you in the ranks so that you rise in ranks to become a supervisor, hence become a larger country. So now it's time to sum it up. Large and small countries. In the Tao paradigm, when we are cultivating the Tao, experienced cultivators are large or great in terms of accumulated wisdom. The examples that I have listed previously from the workplace, real-world interactions, those are related to the material world. So now I want to spend some time about the accumulated wisdom in the spiritual realm instead. So then when we are cultivating the Tao and we are accumulating wisdom, there's beginners, which we all were once upon a time, and perhaps we still are. So beginners, relatively speaking, are smaller countries wishing to learn from the large country. So in this case, we wish to learn from sages, advanced senior cultivators of the Tao. They have experience that we can benefit from. So they are the large country. We converge on that person to learn from that person. So being humble is to not assume an attitude of superiority as you are proceeding in the learning process. To be receptive is to observe and learn from all sources. This applies even when you get to the point where, relatively speaking, you are the large country. You are the one with more accumulated wisdom, and you are in a position to share with other people. Even then, you are someone who hopefully will know that it is to your benefit to learn from all sources, including the people who are not as experienced as you are. So the good person is the teacher. The good person is the large country, and this is referenced elsewhere in the Tao Te Ching. The bad person is the resource. The small country, the beginner, is the resource. Their experience, if they make a mistake, they serve as a counterexample that reminds you of what not to do. So the wise cultivator would always assume the lowest position. Now today, I have announced the new book, The Tao of Tranquility, which is a fusion of Tao teachings and Buddhist teachings. So here, I think it is very appropriate for me when I talk about Tao cultivation to bring in yet another example from Buddhist teachings that shares with the Tao this common ground of humility. And I would like to talk about the Platform Sutra from the Sixth Patriarch, Huinen. So the Platform Sutra says, if you wish to learn the ultimate Bodhi, and Bodhi means wisdom, if you wish to learn the ultimate wisdom, you must not regard beginners lightly. The lowest students may have the highest wisdom. The highest students may be without intentional wisdom. To regard others lightly is to have unlimited fault. And that sounds pretty severe. Now, Huinen, the Sixth Patriarch, pictured here, he himself had a humble beginning. Now, this is from the time of Huinen was such a long time ago that it was not a possibility for him to have been photographed. The photograph that you see of Huinen is his remains that has been mummified. Now, back in his days, he himself had a very humble beginning. Even Before he became the Sixth Patriarch, people looked down on him, and people did not believe that he really knew what he was talking about. They mocked him, they made fun of him. So he had a firsthand experience to be on the receiving end of that mockery. And even after the Sixth Patriarch, he always assumed the position of the lowest river. And people were often surprised, for example, that he was illiterate. He came from such a background of poverty that he never learned to read and write. So then they saw how much he understood the wisdom of the Buddha and the penetrating insights that he provided. They were surprised. So they would ask him, Master, how is it that you understand the meaning if you cannot read the words? To that, Huineng would tell them, all the wondrous wisdom of the Buddha are not dependent on words. They are transmitted apart from words. They are to be understood and grasped in the heart, in the spirit, in the soul, no matter what the words are that you use or don't use. And this is the wisdom that makes the lowest river the most sensible thing of all. You can tell that Lao Tzu completely understood what Huineng would say many, many centuries after his time. So now it is time to wrap up the last two lines of our discussion to get to the very end of 61. Line 14, so that both obtain what they wish. What are the both parties referring to? You can guess it is the large country, the small country. So both sides benefit from the interaction. They both benefit, and that is congruent with the Tao, because the Tao is always win-win. The Tao is never a zero-sum game. A zero-sum game refers to a situation where the resources are finite. So if it's a limited resource and one person gets more, the other person will get less. That's the zero-sum game. The Tao is infinite. It's always win-win. It's never the size of the pie that you get. It's that the pie can always be made bigger. So there's always more than enough for everybody. So in the context of nations, the win-win would be favorable trade and commerce that brings prosperity to the large and the small kingdom. What about the contrary? What about an exchange that is not positive but negative? So if it's a zero-sum game in the sense that one side wins at the expense of the other, you've got negativity. It is also possible that both sides can lose. Both sides can lose in a negative exchange. What is that? That means conflict. In the case of nations, this would be border skirmish, all-out war, battles. In the case of our lives, it would be arguments, bad blood, resentment, ill will. Now, when the Tao is strong in a situation, it's the opposite. Both sides benefit, yourself and the people you interact with will benefit. Just like favorable trade and commerce bring prosperity to the people in both countries, you will also reap the benefits of that positive interaction with everyone around you. So that pretty much concludes that point. One question that I've been asked previously is the question that, hey, is it always possible? Can both sides always win? I mean, situations are different, right? So maybe some situations are more like the zero-sum game. Other situations are more like the Tao. My own experience is that possibilities open up to the person with the right mindset. So now that we have talked about this, if you keep this in mind as you approach a real life situation, I think you begin to see possibilities. Now, just speaking from the perspective of my own experience, this is something that I've been practicing for years, and it's amazing. When I look through the eyes of the Tao, in any situation, and I do mean any, I always find a way out of a situation where all sides come out with something good. So people may assume that it's not always possible, but I can tell you, in the decades that I've been practicing the Tao, I have never found a situation that could not be made into a win-win scenario. We're now on the very last line of 61. It says, the larger one should assume the lower position. So the previous line, so that both obtain what they wish, the larger one should assume the lower position. This is talking about taking the initiative to be humble. So let me explain. Lao Tzu concludes this chapter by pointing out that the large country should take the initiative on the humble approach. Now, when I talk about initiative, I also want to talk about playing host. There's a paradigm here that's different between East and West. In the West, when we talk about the guest and host dynamic, we usually think of the guest as having the initiative because the guest is what the side that takes the approach, that approaches the host. The host is waiting, receiving the guest. So the host appears to be the passive side and the guest is the active side. In ancient Chinese culture, the thinking was actually flipped around. And this is based on observation of the interactions in the place of the host, where the guest has come into the house and the host is now taking the initiative, like serving tea, like asking the guest is, do you need anything else? Are you comfortable? Can I get you a snack? So the host is the one that's busy and moving around, while the guest, being the guest, is just sitting in one place, maybe just sipping from the tea and receiving the attention of the host. So in that dynamic, you can see that the host is active and the guest is passive. So in order for the larger country to be the lowest river on the receiving side, there's actually initiative to be proactive on the larger country perspective. So I want to emphasize that this is different and 180 degrees opposite from our current Western mindset. But when you understand how the ancient Chinese thought about this, it makes sense. In the ancient Chinese paradigm, the host has initiative. The host is active. The host is the one doing things. Therefore, in an interaction between host and guest, the large country, the host, should be the one to take the initiative to be humble. As I mentioned previously, for the small country, in approaching the large country, it may be about survival because the existence of the smaller country may be at risk. It may need the protection of the large country. For the large country, the host, it's about adding to its power and prestige. And therefore, the large country, you can see that the priorities are different. What is at stake is different for the small country and large country. It's like a predator on the African savanna chasing prey. For the prey, it's a matter of life and death. For the predator, it's lunch. So priorities are different. What is at stake is different. So the large country can afford to be proactive, should be proactive. And this applies to life as well. So just keep in mind for now that both the large country and the small country, they have a common goal. They both want something that's beneficial on both sides. And the small country has more to lose and therefore can be understandably nervous, like the guest in a house receiving the attention of the host. This applies to all settings in our lives, a business unit where we happen to work. It applies to the family. It applies to the Tao community among our friends. So let's take a look at the practical application. Still on the last line, this is where I want to point out that in this particular chapter, to be the large country or the larger country is similar to when we say, be the bigger person in a personal exchange. Now, you've seen this any number of times, when some guy is having an argument with another guy, you might approach the guy and say, listen, you can be the bigger man. You can be forgiving. You can be the one to apologize first. When you apologize first, you are being the bigger person. You are not being petulant or petty. Being petty is absolutely not the Tao. It's contrary to the Tao. Whereas being generous and giving and nurturing is very much congruent with the Tao. This benefits everyone. And if you think about it, it's congruent with the Tao because the Tao can be compared to a river that flows across the land. Everything that it touches benefits from the river. All the living things, whether plants or animals, insects, all things are nourished by the river. All things benefit. So then for us, the simple way to get the win-win scenario is to take the initiative. Now, suppose the situation has already turned negative and you may need to repair it somehow. There's a couple of possibilities. You may want to move on and start with the Tao in mind so that your next interaction will be better. And you can put that in the past. You want to learn from the experience. You want to benefit from having that experience, and then you want to use that experience in your next interaction. But if you have no choice but to attempt to repair it, then that's what we're talking about here. Taking the initiative. So then the large country should take the initiative is what Lao Tzu says. When it comes to the Tao Te Ching, I always encourage everyone to always, with every concept, flip it around to see if it still makes sense. In this case, when you turn that around, you're basically going from the large country should take the initiative to be humble. When you turn that around the other way, you get this. Taking the initiative makes you the larger country. So the interaction may have started as one among equals or, very closely matched. But if that turns negative and one side or the other has to apologize, the side that takes the initiative becomes the larger country. The larger country is the side with power. So this is not something that makes you weak, quite the opposite. Be the one to forgive and forget. Be the one to withdraw from hostilities first. The one to initiate apology. This is something that has to be done even when it's not easy. If it's easy, everybody will be doing it. Especially when it's not easy, that's where the Tao can make a difference in your life. So in the example of the river that flows across the land, nobody loses, everybody wins. And that's why be the one to reach out first. Be the one to smile and nod first. When you are approaching somebody, and you're not sure if you should initiate or not, well, just go ahead, smile and nod first. Let's summarize that. Interactions. Be the first to smile and nod. Be the first to offer a friendly greeting. Be the first to extend your hand. Extend your hand in friendship, extend your hand in offering assistance. Could you use a hand? Do you need some help? Extend your hand in that interaction. So this is day-to-day situations where you are interacting with other people. Then there's also contention. This is when some interaction turned ugly for one reason or another. You turned negative. In that particular situation, you want to become the large country. You want to be the first to withdraw from hostilities, be the first to apologize, be the first to forgive and forget. So for a question like this, hey, what if you're not sure? Who is the large country in the situation? Like who's got the power? Well, the very question, the very fact that this question is being asked and you're thinking about it, this uncertainty that you see here in this question mark, that is the sure sign. That is the indicator pointing to you. If you are not sure who's the large country, you're the large country. So that is the last message that I want to convey from this very interesting chapter of the Tao Te Ching, with a very useful message that we can all apply. It is time now for the paraphrase. We always do a paraphrase at the end so that we can demonstrate we have completely understood the meaning of this particular chapter. So we have three sections here. We start out with section 1 about the large country, the lowest river being the convergence, the converging point being receptive for all others. So let's go ahead and convey that, try to paraphrase that with modern language. The large country representing the more powerful party in a given situation should be humble, like the lowest river that smaller streams flow into. It then becomes a point of convergence that receives from many sources. When you apply this to life, you find that humility lets you receive abundantly. An open mind lets you absorb new wisdom. And the yin principle lets you overcome aggression through serenity. We then move on to the second section here. The second section is all about the interactions from between the large country and the small country, getting very specific here. So in comparing section 1 and section 2, you can see that section 1 is basically laying out the overall philosophical framework, and then section 2 is applying that to the interactions between the large and small. So here is the paraphrase that I want to offer for that. The larger country should be humble in reaching out to the smaller country. That means the more powerful person, like a teacher or a client in a business setting, should be gracious and generous in initiating and interaction. This establishes a positive harmony for both sides. The less powerful side, like a student or service provider, can then follow the lead in approaching the exchange with a similar attitude of humility. This is the beginning of diplomacy for countries and the starting point of social courtesy for humans. So the Tao operates at different levels. Whether it's a powerful empire or just you and me living our lives, the Tao applies universally and equally at all different levels. So let's go into the third and final section. This is the conclusion. And here's the paraphrase I want to offer for that. Although both sides utilize the Tao of humility and receptive openness, their goals are different. The large country wishes to encompass and embrace, while the small country wishes to serve and learn. Both sides benefit, and it all starts with a gesture of goodwill. We should do the same in life. So even if we didn't start out as the large country, we become the large country. And this goes back to my remark about being the bigger person or becoming the bigger person. So finally, to polish everything off, we've got the full circle discussion as the very last slide in regards to 61. You can see here, I've got the first line, the large country is like the lowest river, and then the last line, the larger one should assume the lower position. And you can see that they're very similar. And this is one of the best chapters to demonstrate the usefulness of doing the full circle. So in the last line of chapter 61, Lao Tzu says it is especially important for the large country to assume the lower position, the position of humility, which is actually a position of power. So we link this back to the beginning that talks about the large country being the lowest river, and now it's clear the lower position, lowest river, they are synonymous. And we link it back down for the full circle. This is one of the clearest examples in the Tao Te Ching that each chapter forms a circle in meaning. And it says, in order to be great, one must be humble. The greater you aspire to be, the more humble you must become. So here we go. The large country is like the lowest river. Use that imagery of the lowest river as a handy reminder that this idea from Tao Te Ching chapter 61 is something that we can all use in life. It is universally applicable. It is the virtue of humility, and it doesn't matter what role you play, large country or small, the benefits may vary, but it's always the right way to go because it is the Tao. So today we talked about the large country. Previously, we extensively covered the lowest river, and then we talked about the convergence point, the soft approach. To be receptive, to practice the yin principle, is using the light touch, the gentle touch, the soft approach. So this is the summary that we have seen twice before. Let's go to the ending part of the summary for 61. The small country has the humble approach, using courtesy and respect when you come into contact. And when we apply this to life, we get to win people over. When we provide service to other people, keep in mind that good service is hard to find. So utilizing this principle will easily elevate you head and shoulders above the competition. I definitely find that to be true for me. No matter what it is that I do, providing great service makes me different and preferred from anyone else. This is how you can achieve effortless excellence. Doesn't require a whole lot of work. It's a key to success. so that the small country eventually becomes the large country in a very natural progression. So this is how you become more powerful, more spiritually powerful, with a very natural progression from small country to large country. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.